Good morning, Australia, and good evening, Chile. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar, Our Green Hydrogen Future from Aspiration to Realization. There are many parallels between Australia and Chile in terms of our economies, challenges, and opportunity for the future. To capitalize on our potential in the Australian context, we need to get out and have a red-hot crack at building world-leading industry for the renewable energy solution, much like in Chile, where we say tierra de abundantes oportunidades to take advantage of the enormous potential in the sun, wind, and water resources. Together, we must embrace our pioneering spirit to exploit on our natural advantages in each respect. Australia and Chile have plenty of natural resources to generate renewable energy. A lot of information has been published in the different media in the last couple of months, just to mention some. In the north of Australia, between Alice Springs and Darwin, the biggest PV solar of the world will be built, generating up to 10 gigawatts for the year 2026. And this energy will be used by Singapore, Australia, and the future solar mining. Additionally, in the south of Chile, the Magallanes region, a project has been launched for a pilot plant that will produce green hydrogen through an electrolyzer that will be fed by wind power. Both production initiatives allow us to position ourselves as potential producer of green hydrogen worldwide, favorably impacting climate change and open opportunity in the economic development and social sector. This will, without a doubt, have an impact in generating jobs, diversifying energy production, and attracting investors. My name is Cristian Belis Varas, President of the Energy Committee of the Chile-Australia Chamber of Commerce, and as a representative of Auscham, we are very proud to be part of this collaboration initiative to build a safe, competitive, and innovative hydrogen industry for the benefit of the both countries. If you have any question, we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Please send your question through the Q&A at the button that is available below your screen. Again, we will make our effort to answer your questions, but we have a compact schedule. Now, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Patricio Powell, Ambassador of Chile in Australia, and our distinguished speakers and panelists. Thanks again, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cristian. Good evening and good morning to all presenters and participants in Chile and Australia and in other places of the world. I want to begin by thanking the organizers for putting together this space for a very timely dialogue with the most relevant actors on the realization of a green energy future. For Chile and Australia, hydrogen presents a remarkable and positive opportunity. As you know, important decisions are already being made both in the public and private sector in industry in Chile and in Australia to support the goal of becoming leaders in the provision of green energy and associated products. The creation and development of this industry requires international interaction and cooperation, and it is through initiatives like this that this productive dialogue that already exists can be expanded and so it be made more fruitful. The conversation and actions around renewables and the economy of green hydrogen can become a new and dynamic pillar of the already very strong Chilean-Australia economic and political relations. I am now honored to introduce the Minister of Energy of Chile, Mr. Juan Carlos Llobet, to address the Chilean vision and strategy for green hydrogen. Minister Llobet holds degrees in business and economics and in public policy and has occupied previous positions in the private sector and in other ministerial and vice ministerial responsibilities. Minister Llobet heads the Ministry of Energy of Chile with the mission of leading the country towards a new, greener energy mix with an emphasis on non-conventional renewable energy to propel the transition towards a carbon neutral economy. Minister Llobet, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It's great to see you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Good afternoon, everyone in Chile. Good morning, everyone in Australia. So I'm going to share some slides with you. I think the host must allow me to, though. I'm not allowed to. So if you can help me with that, I can share the slides. So there we go. So what I'm going to talk today briefly, around 10 minutes, is about how Australia and Chile, we basically both countries have, I think, common goals on this area. We also have common challenges, and then I think looking forward, we need to find ways to cooperate before we start thinking about competition, right? Competition is usually the way in which many people frame this issue, and I think it's more cooperation. At least at the early stage, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So why do I say that we have common goals? I think the main challenge we have in front of us, which I think it's the most challenging issue we need to solve as a generation, and I think I'm not exaggerating when I say that, is climate change, right? It's a very difficult challenge, as we all know. We gotta make decisions quickly to stop its very negative consequences, but it's a complex issue because we need to make the effort, but future generations are the ones who will suffer its most serious consequences if we don't act on time. And I think the awareness about the seriousness of this issue, it's getting a lot of traction and momentum. And I think it's great news. But as that chart summarizes, we have many ideas, we have many conversations going on, but to be honest, we are running out of time, right? We gotta act quickly if we really want to stop climate change on time. And if you look at where the emissions that generate climate change, where do they coming from? These are the numbers for Chile, but the numbers change a little bit between countries, but the conclusion does not, right? So the energy sector is at the center of the challenge we have on climate change. In Chile, almost 80% of emissions come from the energy sector, around a third from electricity production, around a quarter or 24% from transport, 14% from industry emissions, 7% from buildings, and so on, right? So if we are not able to transform our energy systems, and this is true in Chile and throughout the world, we will not be able to stop climate change on time. I mean, that's simple, right? And I think climate change is an enormous threat, as I said, but I think it holds also enormous opportunities, right? So technology allows us to replace fossil fuels across all these sectors. We're making very good progress in Chile, replacing coal with renewables in the electricity production matrix, for example. We are increasingly including electromobility in transportation, and we have a very clear plan to be carbon neutral by 2050, right? So I don't want to get into all the details of this chart, but what it basically says is we run the numbers and said, okay, guys, what if we keep doing things as we have been doing them in the past? And that is what it's here, it's called the reference scenario, right? By 2050, we will be emitting around 130 million tons of CO2. That is around, just to give you a sense, that around 0.3% of global CO2 emissions, right? But nevertheless, President Piñera said last year, this is what science is telling us, we gotta be carbon neutral by 2050, and we assume that commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is what we need to do. And we put in place a very detailed plan to do that, right? So we gotta reduce CO2 emissions by half by 2050 to 65 million tons. And then our forest will capture that 65 million to be neutral by 2050. We got to do many, many different things in the industry, in industries, in electromobility, as I said, phasing out coal, in energy efficiency, sustainable buildings, and so on. But green hydrogen, we estimate, will contribute between 20 and 27% of the reduction in emissions that we gotta do before 2050, right? So it would be an enormous contributor to that reduction in emissions. And if you look at the numbers around the world, there are different estimates again, but I would say most people agree that green hydrogen will contribute with around 20% of CO2 emissions that are required between 2050. Some people say that it can contribute up to 45%, right? So in any case, it's going to be enormous, right? So it's an enormous opportunity, especially for countries that have, as Australia and Chile do, that have enormous renewable energy potential, right? So those are the goals, right? We both want to be carbon neutral by 2050. We have enormous renewable potential, but we have several challenges to overcome, right? So the first challenge to make sure that hydrogen can make the contribution we expect is to reduce the cost of producing hydrogen. As you know, producing green hydrogen today it's very expensive, at least if you compare it with the alternatives like gray hydrogen or diesel, which are the basic fuels it's going to replace. We can reduce cost by reducing even more the cost of producing electricity. You know that the cost of producing electricity with solar PV has decreased by around 80% in the last 10 years. So we still have some room to reduce the energy costs, as this chart shows. We can do efforts in other parts of the cost structure, but most of the reduction will come from CapEx. That is, scaling up the electrolyzers to reduce the cost of each unit that we produce, right? That is the biggest challenge. And that is a challenge that is a global challenge, right? Because we need to scale up production throughout the world to be able to reduce the cost of green hydrogen. So if we are able to accelerate the deployment of electrolyzers around the world, we will be able to accelerate the cost reduction curve, to move quickly down that curve to be able to replace fossil fuels as quickly as possible, right? And this is something that we need to work on, that Australia needs to work on, and every other country that has a potential to produce green hydrogen, including Morocco, Spain, Saudi Arabia, and so on. We all have to solve this problem together, right? So it's a natural area for cooperation. That will allow us to basically accelerate this adoption schedule, if you want, right? So there are some technologies, especially in transportation, where we can use already green hydrogen at competitive cost, but there are many other applications, as this chart that was prepared by McKinsey, by the way, shows, right? So it's enormous areas in which we can use green hydrogen, but we got to move quickly to reduce costs so that we can accelerate this transition to make it competitive at different areas, right? As you know, green hydrogen has an enormous potential to replace fossil fuel, especially in industry, in sectors that are very hard to abate because they are hard to electrify, and especially in transportation, right? Especially long-haul transportation. One of the things that I want to emphasize on this graph is that you can see ships here, down here. I think this is something we can talk about later, because I think shipping is very important for us. And when I say us, I mean Chile, but also Australia. So countries that have economies that are open to the world, that export many of its products to the world. It's not enough that we reduce the carbon footprint of our production in Chile or Australia if the emissions of shipping are still high, right? Because what consumers and buyers will increasingly look at is the CO2 footprint of products that they acquire, right? So we need to reduce the carbon footprint at home, but we also got to work together to reduce the carbon footprint of shipping. And that is especially important for countries that are whose location it's far away from most of the countries that acquire our export products. So shipping of hydrogen is in itself a big challenge, right? As you know, we can transport theoretically liquid hydrogen, but it's still very, very expensive. We can transport ammonia, which is a very developed logistics industry, so that works. But still, there are big challenges in terms of how do we transport liquid hydrogen and also methanol and synthetic fuels. And this is also a challenge that we got to face together, especially given our locations. So I think this is also an area in which we need to work together. So Chile, and I think this is also true for Australia, to make sure that we can make this industry happen, to scale up and grow quickly, we got to put together different pieces of a puzzle, right? And we always talk about off-takers, financial investors, engineering and technology, electricity providers, hydrogen producers, and obviously develop the rules of the game and create a stable regulatory environment. Since this is moving very quickly, I think there are enormous opportunities to learn from one another, to facilitate the job for investors if we have regulations that are harmonic and are similar, right? And I think that is another natural area for cooperation. Competition, I think, as I said at the beginning, this market is going to be enormous, enormous. We had a meeting with your ambassador here in Chile a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, and we used a sporting analogy, yeah, right? We said, okay, we want to, at some point in time in the future, we want to play rugby against one another, right? But we got to build the field before. If we don't have the rugby field, there's no way we can compete, right? So we got to work together to cooperate, to make this industry happen, to make it a reality. And then it's going to be so big that we're going to have, I mean, we will all have a piece of the pie, right? So McKinsey estimates that by 2050, the green hydrogen market can be as big as $2.5 trillion a year. So, right, that's half the size of the current oil market. Even if that projections are half that, it's going to be enormous, and it's going to be plenty of room for many countries to participate in this industry. Just to give you a sense, and with this I will finish. If we capture just 5% of the global market estimated by McKinsey for 2050, with just 5% of that market, Chile could be exporting in green hydrogen what we are exporting today in copper, which is our biggest industry. It's 10% of our GDP, almost half our exports. So this is an enormous industry. We gotta cooperate today to make sure that we make this industry happen quickly. And if that happens, we will have plenty of room for all of us to basically produce and export green hydrogen. I want to finish by inviting you all to join us next week on the 3rd and 4th. We're going to host a Green Hydrogen Summit in which we will unveil, we will give the details of our green hydrogen strategy. And I hope to see you there so we can tell you a little bit more about what we're doing and find new ways to work together to make this happen. And just to finish, I really want to celebrate the agreement, the MOU, that our Hydrogen Council is signing with the Hydrogen Council of Australia. I think the cooperation has to be between governments, but also between hydrogen councils, between companies themselves. I think that is the way to make this move forward quickly, as we all expect. So thank you so much. I will leave it there, and we'll see you later in the Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Jovet, for sharing with us the green hydrogen plan in Chile and the important announcement about the MOU between Australia Hydrogen Council and H2 Chile. We also invite you to stay on the online to be part of the conversation panel, please. Continue with our program. I would like to introduce Mr. Darren Miller, CEO of ARENA, the Australia Renewable Energy Agency. Darren has extensive experience in renewable energy, electricity retail, technology, and finance. As you will hear from Darren, ARENA was established by the Australian government to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies and increase the supply of renewable energy through innovation that benefits Australian consumers and business. It is currently very active in the hydrogen space and will share with us the hydrogen strategy in Australia. Darren, thank you for being here. You may begin.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you very much for inviting me to present to you today. I'm sitting here in my office in Canberra, which is very exciting for me because I'm based in Sydney, and for the first time now in 3 months, I've been able to travel to my Canberra office and spend time with my people here. So it's getting better, and that's really good. So I'm going to share my presentation and talk to you for about 10 minutes about what kinds of things we're doing in Australia, and certainly ARENA's got a central role to play in promoting the hydrogen opportunity in Australia. So ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and our job is to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies and therefore increase the supply of renewable energy in Australia. And we've been doing this successfully since 2012, so we've been around for about just over 8 years. And as I'll show you on a couple of slides' time, we've invested over $1.6 billion Australian now into renewable energy technologies, and most recently turning our attention to new opportunities in industry, and particularly the green hydrogen opportunity. We operate through the innovation chain, so we work with early stage researchers coming out of universities and other research labs, such as the CSIRO, which is another government agency, National Science and Industrial Research Organisation agency. And we work with commercial players through the early stage development, piloting trials, and then later stage deployment projects, then often working with larger banks in new technologies that have not yet been taken up at scale by the commercial sector, but we're helping to put in place the financing structures that allow the banking sector and our sister agency, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, to invest low-cost debt and equity into much larger projects. So we have a fairly unique role in that we span that whole innovation stage from research right through to deployment. This slide indicates, as I said, sort of a bit of our history. We've operated throughout Australia. We have committed so far $1.63 billion to 566 projects right throughout Australia. In the early days, we supported generation technologies. We supported geothermal, which is no longer a thing in Australia, really at scale. We've supported solar PV, both the research side as well as the deployment side. And in fact, almost half of our funding to date has gone into solar PV in some way, whether that's the important research that our universities are doing all the way through to large scale deployments. But I'll say that we're no longer involved in supporting solar PV per se, given that solar PV is the low cost form of generating energy and is cost competitive with the incumbent technologies. So as time has moved on and as technologies have developed, we've turned our attention to the later, more important technologies for further decarbonisation. And I'll talk a little bit more in this, on the next slide about what our current priorities are. Oh, I'm sorry, I've seen my speaker notes there. Let me just delete those. I assume you can just see my big screen now. let me know if that's a problem. Otherwise, I'll just carry on. So we've actually invested so far to date, and I'll talk a little bit more about getting to hydrogen now, but we've invested $54 million into hydrogen projects already. And that's really been an active space for us over the past 2 years. Most of that have been small scale projects and demonstrations, but increasingly turning our attention to much larger scale projects through our new hydrogen round, which I'll talk about as well. So, as I said, I'll talk about our current priorities. So really, we are focused on 3 key things right now. Firstly, it's the continued integration of renewables into the electricity system. And that's less about generation technologies, as I said, and more about how do we ensure that we can go from our current share of about 20–25% variable renewable energy in our electricity grids up to much higher shares, closer to 100% over time. And so there's a lot of work around power electronics, distributed energy technology, and the like. Our second and the priority we'll talk about today is the hydrogen priority, which is really framed as green hydrogen or renewable hydrogen. And that's because of our mandate. There are other projects in Australia that are looking at gasification of brown coal and conversion to hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, but that's not ARENA's domain at this point in time. So we're firmly focused on the electrolysis pathway. And then finally, and actually quite related to hydrogen, is our intention and desire to support industry to reduce emissions. As Minister Jobe pointed out, industry is a major source of energy emissions as well as process emissions. And for Australia as well, that's the case. And we see our assistance in helping industry to reduce their emissions, and hydrogen being a key pathway for that as an important part. And really, just wanted to make the point that the renewable hydrogen sector is deeply connected both into the electricity sector and can support the electricity sector as well as into the industrial sector. So Australia's progress, and I'll talk about 3 sort of key things here. Firstly, the National Hydrogen Strategy was set and released last year, and it was chaired by Dr. Alan Finkel, our Chief Scientist, and really sets a vision for Australia to become a major producer and user, if you like, of green hydrogen for the future. And ARENA has a key role to play in the delivery of that hydrogen strategy. The next important thing for ARENA is the delivery of our Minister for Energy and Emissions Reductions first low emissions technology statement, which is a statement of intent by the government to prioritise certain technologies and have industry join with the government in promoting the deployment and innovation around those technologies. 5 key priorities were highlighted, and hydrogen is one of those. And the Minister has set some stretch goals or targets for hydrogen production, and would like us to see us achieving hydrogen under $2 Australian per kilo in the future. And just to set the context, that's about $1.50 US in today's exchange conversion. So that's a big stretch goal, and the Minister Jobe put on screen some targets going from $6 US down to $2. And certainly Fiona, who's joined us on this call, Fiona Simon from the Australian Hydrogen Council, and I were on a call the other day, and we were talking about similar numbers, roughly in the range of $6 to $9 Australian today, with the target of coming down to $2 Australian in the future. And then finally, well, ARENA's annual report, which is the 3rd document on screen, highlights the work that we've been doing, and certainly our investment priorities and our investment plan that's available publicly point to a key support for hydrogen in the future. So a little bit about hydrogen. We've got a picture there of the Yarra Pilbara fertilizers plant, which is in the northwest corner of Australia, actually supplies 5% of the world's ammonia from this facility. And I think it's important to realize that, and certainly we've taken this perspective, that we need to be able to use hydrogen, green hydrogen, in our domestic setting before we can have an export opportunity. If we can use our domestic demand cases, whether that's gas pipelines, fertilizer factories, explosive factories, or transport, to scale up hydrogen and learn before we put our minds to or solve the challenge of shipping long distances to the Southeast Asian countries that we think are our key supply market, key customer markets, that gives us the opportunity to learn and get the costs out of the system and be ready for that export opportunity. very importantly, we think a large amount of government support is going to be needed to help bridge that commercial gap between the $6 to $9 that we see today and the $2 of the future. Just very briefly, I talked about the fact that ARENA had invested to date over $55 million now in 28 various projects. There've been a range of research and development projects to deal with improvements to the way we produce, store, and transport hydrogen, and then as well as pilot projects and small-scale deployments to date in the range of 250 kilowatts, 500 kilowatt electrolyzers, right throughout different use cases, be that transport, gas injection. We've even got some very innovative technology around converting biogas to hydrogen at the Hazer pilot plant facility in Western Australia, and various other companies and large industrial players looking at feasibility studies for much larger projects. So we've done some important work to date. And then really where we're turning our attention right now is what we've called our renewable hydrogen deployment round, where we've allocated $70 million to help scale up to the next size of electrolyzer. We're hoping to have at least 2 of these 7 shortlisted projects achieve financial close, be supported by our round, and develop at least 10 megawatts each of electrolysis capacity in a single site. I won't talk too much about the specific projects because they're working on their final applications and they'll be assessed early next year. But this will allow our industry to scale up about tenfold from our current state of deployment in terms of electrolyzer capacity, and is an important milestone towards that future goal of $2. Very finally, ARENA is a funding agency. We provide grants, but we're very important, have a very important function around knowledge sharing. We have an extensive knowledge bank on our website of all the projects we've supported. Everything is publicly available. We have some very interesting stuff around hydrogen in our latest podcast season called Rewired, which you can download using your favorite podcast app, and encourage people to have a look at what's there. It's a really fantastic resource that I hope we can all learn from. Very happy and encouraged to join Chile on this journey, and I think I totally agree. It's about a cooperation and support for each other as we head towards this opportunity. I think there'll be enough in the economics of this that competition will be something we can worry about much later. So thank you very much for having me.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Darren, for your presentation. Very interesting. We also invite you to stay online to be part of the conversation panel, please. Now, I want to lead with you, Mr. Orlando Jimenez, Executive Director of CSIRO Chile. CSIRO, or the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, is Australian National Science Agency. Established by the Australian government over a century ago, it is dedicated to solve the greatest challenges through innovation, science, and technology. Their office in Chile is the first ever subsidiary office established overseas, and next year mark their 10 years anniversary in the country. Orlando has extensive experience in generating and leading large-scale projects involving public and private actors across multiple sectors, including mining and energy. For the next stage of the webinar, Orlando will assume the role of the moderator with a conversation between the panelists regarding the future of green hydrogen between both countries. Orlando, thank you for you being here. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Christian, and hello to everybody. It's a real honor to have the possibility to moderate this fantastic panel. So perhaps let me start by sharing with you a bit of a reflection on how we see this. If you look at the international experience on hydrogen, probably the biggest challenge is that there's no one single thing that you need to do. It's most likely a combination of many elements. So we face then a bit of a dilemma in terms of solving a number of things, and there is an interdependence through the value chain that needs to be addressed, and that's why this panel is so important, because it brings government, it brings international collaboration, it brings diplomacy, it brings agencies that support the development of programs and projects, it brings the private sector who are already making significant progress on that. And therefore, for me, as a leader of an organization that takes technologies from the lab to the market, and we are essentially aim at having impact on the economy, is absolutely a privilege. And I thank you so much, the organizers, for letting me moderate this panel. One of the interesting things, after being a Chilean but working in Australia for close to 10 years, is it's really amazing to see the similarities between the two countries. And 12 years ago, the FTE, so the Free Trade Agreement, was signed between Chile and Australia. And at that time, one concept was coined in both sides of the Pacific, which was that these countries were like-minded countries. It means essentially countries that have a similar perspective on a number of things. And last year, the International Renewable Energy Agency issued a really interesting report in which this international agency identified 6 countries with the largest potential on hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen. And one was identified as the giant for Australia, and the other country was so-called the hidden champion, meaning for Chile. So we have a giant and a hidden champion talking tonight and this morning, Australia time, to find ways to collaborate. And with that note of introduction, let me introduce the remaining panelists. I'm delighted to welcome Clara Bowman. Clara is the General Manager for Andes Mining and Energy. It's a really interesting company. It's a company that 10 years ago was a startup, and now it's the 5th largest IPP generator in Chile. And Clara is going to share with us the very exciting projects that they are developing in this particular space. Then let me introduce Fiona Simon. Fiona is the CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council, a very relevant organization that essentially brings together companies and stakeholders that are pushing at an international level, and this is the Australian chapter, on how the world could collaborate together to foster the development of the hydrogen and green hydrogen industry in particular. And last but not least, let me introduce also Penelope Howard. Penelope is a very senior diplomat, member of, at this point, Assistant Director in Energy Focal Point for Climate Innovation and Investment at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. She's been very active as well in the APEC and Asia Pacific context, and also a friend of Chile. And she has told us that she's really delighted to be with us as well. So after this introduction, now it's the time for questions. The idea is to have a very fluid and dynamic set of questions. And I would, at this point, beg to our colleagues from the panel to focus on the time allocated, because we have several of you that need to speak in this occasion. We are going to start with Minister Llobet. Thank you so much, Minister, for your presentation. It was extremely insightful and interesting. And I perhaps going to start talking a little bit about something that you see very regularly on a number of international reports, roadmaps, policy reports, which goes probably along the lines of not the very sort of tangible elements that are critical for developing this industry, but it's much more about social capital. It's about leadership. And you have played a very interesting role in championing in the local context how Chile could harvest this potential. So in this particular point, how do you see leadership becoming an element in the Australia-Chile relationship, and how our countries could work together on specific initiatives?
Thank you so much, Orlando. That was a generous question. So we're making efforts, right? I think being an advocate for green hydrogen is not that difficult, right? Its potential is so enormous that it's relatively easy, if I may say that. But I think the biggest challenge with green hydrogen, and I think with other policies that need time to mature, is how do you build a broad consensus behind them, and how do you prevent them from becoming a political issue in the negative sense, right? If these issues are politicized, I mean, they don't. It's difficult to sustain efforts over time. So I think the biggest challenge here is to, put the issues on the agenda, on the public agenda, so you mobilize people behind them, but also to bring on board different actors, right? Politicians from the opposition, actors from academia, from NGOs, from the private sector. I think that is the biggest. It sounds maybe too simple, but I think it's very, very important. In the energy sector, we have been relatively successful, I would say. We have accomplished several things, especially because each government has had the capacity to build on top of what the previous government had done. And that is not that obvious, at least in the Chilean context. There are other areas of policy in which each government that is elected kind of comes to government with its own ideas and try to start from scratch. I think on climate change, on energy policy, on green hydrogen, we need to sustain efforts over time, and I think that is very important. And to do that, you need to build broad consensus. That sometimes requires more time, but I think that is essential. And I think diplomacy and the relationship between governments can help on that, right? Because you can kind of lock in certain decisions to make them sustainable over time. So I think international cooperation is very important to make that sustainability of policy stronger, I would say.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we are going to ask Clara Bowman. Clara, you there? So I have two questions. So the first, perhaps, is to ask you to comment on your fantastic projects. And I say fantastic because all of us, I think all of the other members of the panel, in a way, work with companies like you. I mean, governments, funding agencies, research organizations, technology providers. At the end of the day, what we do is flesh out in what companies like you are doing. And in that sense, I think it would be really interesting for the audience to understand and see a little bit of what you have in mind and what you have already announced. And in that context, after you explain what the overview of your projects is, the question probably is to understand and learn as well, what, in your opinion, are the critical elements in order for you to be successful? What can be done by all of us to help you to succeed? And if we have some more time, I will ask another question, but I think probably it's enough with this since we are running a little bit of time. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Orlando, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. So at AME, we recently launched together with Enel, Siemens, Porsche, and NAP, a very innovative project which we've been developing now for several years in Patagonia, in the south of Chile, in the Magallanes region, which basically takes the very, very high quality renewable energy that's available in that region, which is wind energy. And we're starting with an initial pilot phase where we have take that wind energy, we have an electrolyzer which converts it to hydrogen, but we don't stop there. We also take carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere via direct air capture process. And then we are combining that together in a methanol reactor to make methanol. And then the methanol then gets converted to gasoline, which will be sold to the German company Porsche, the automotive company. And so it's a project that we're extremely happy about. We have a number of further developments that we hope to then roll out on a multi-gigawatt basis in Magallanes after that. And our hope at AME at least is that this work that we're doing in Chile will serve to be a basis on a technological and commercial foundation for us to be able to then develop additional projects in the rest of the world and turn ourselves into the world's first carbon neutral fuel company internationally. And to that end, we're actually now opening an office in Australia to be able to focus on doing projects in Australia, which we're very excited about doing. I'm an Australian, but I've been living in Chile now for 10 years. And so I'm very happy to be able to, representing a Chilean company, go back to Australia and hopefully share some of the technological developments that we've been able to do here in Chile and replicate them in Australia.
In terms of the key elements for you to succeed, what would you reflect on?
I think that's an interesting question. There's probably 3 things which are needed for us to be able to make this product successful in the short term. The first is that we need a very, very high quality renewable energy resource. And that means not only that it has to be cheap, but it also has to have a very high plant factor. And I know not everyone out there is an energy nerd. So basically the plant factor means how much of the year are you actually producing renewable energy? And that's important in this context because everything that's downstream from the energy is quite expensive. And we all hope that the costs will come down, but until now, but for now they're quite expensive. And so we need to be using it as much as possible to be able to get a low price at the end. So if we have the very, very high plant factor, low cost energy that we have in Chile, we're able to have a much more competitive product at the other end. The next element, which is important, is that we need to be able to do it at scale. And so that's something that has been highlighted, I think, in a number of the other presentations. Both in Chile and in Australia, we have a tremendous renewable potential. We're able to do projects that are multi-gigawatt projects. And that, again, if we want to have a competitive final product, particularly in this kind of electrochemical space that we're hoping to enter into as a company, is extremely important in terms of being able to get a very competitive final product. And the third element, which comes from that concept of scale, is that it needs to be able to be financed efficiently. And that means that we need a very stable regulatory framework. These projects are basically pure CapEx projects. And so we need to be able to convince investors to invest billions of dollars and get that money paid back over a 20 to 25 year period. And so to do that, they need to be very comfortable about the regulatory environment. There needs to be a lot of liquidity, both nationally and internationally available to be able to invest in those projects at a low cost, because a large part of the final cost of that product is financing costs and repaying that initial investment. And so to the extent that, and I think these are strengths that both Chile and Australia have, and that's why we as a company are very interested in both of these environments, because we're able to have a very high quality resource, we're able to do these projects at scale and have a low financing cost. And we think that is going to be able to make us competitive in the short to medium term.
Fantastic, Clara. Thank you very much. I have another question, but for the sake of time, we are going to move to the next colleague at the panel. So Fiona, Simon, you there, Fiona?
Yes, hello.
Hello, so good morning. The question for you is, we've seen, and I think Darren's presentation was clear on this, is that Australia is a few years ahead of Chile in the hydrogen space. And the leadership in particular that the Australian Hydrogen Council has been very important in the Australian context. Based on that experience of yours and your organization, what lessons and or suggestions you can share with us about the whole process related to the development of this green hydrogen energy in Australia?
Certainly. Thank you, Orlando, and thank you for having me. So unsurprisingly, I think a key element is collaboration. And very much the ability for us to work together. And in Australia, it's across jurisdictions as well, because we have states and territories as well as our federal government. And also, hydrogen is so versatile that there are so many opportunities, and it connects sectors in new ways. But this also brings with it some additional complexity, and so collaboration becomes all the more important across sector boundaries, geographic boundaries, and well, really across all the boundaries. So, but what I really want to focus on is policy. So, because we're in a pre-commercial environment, the policy settings to create the market are everything. And we tend to talk about the 3 licenses to operate for the industry. So the economic license, the regulatory license, and the social license. And we've heard about elements of them this morning already. And certainly we need to look at the economic license, because right now, we're pre-commercial. So what's required then to bring that market into being? And there's the 2 key policy mechanisms there. One is funding. So, and we've heard from Darren, obviously. So having ARENA has been absolutely fundamental in Australia. Having a government body that was able to responsibly and reliably provide funding. So this is not concessional finance where there's an expected return. In this environment, there aren't returns right now. So having a body like ARENA has been fundamental, and certainly, so from what I've seen, the funding from ARENA and also the concessional finance through our Clean Energy Finance Corporation, I think it's for every dollar that is spent by government, it draws through another $3 or $4 from the private sector. So to create the market, there is a need for government to commit, and there is a very strong public interest argument to do that. The second sort of main sort of arm of the policy side are the standards and targets and different policy measures to bring on. So let's focus on demand. So to bring through that demand to again help create that market, create the market pool, and that's across the various applications. And we heard the minister talking about shipping, but I might just focus even just on road transport, on vehicles. What we don't have yet in Australia, but which we would like to see, are ways of valuing lower carbon alternatives, where ideally you draw this demand through with vehicle standards, with fleet targets, with a range of ways of then bringing through that demand. And that in Australia certainly it works across the applications. So we've got a number of our states use natural gas for heating and cooking. Ideally, what we'd want is then having natural gas blending targets, so hydrogen into the natural gas networks to replace methane and to then sort of decarbonise, but also it provides a huge offtake that then starts to get us in a better position for that sort of giant superpower energy future for hydrogen. So I think it's that combined notion of the funding side and the policy side that needs to come from government, because that tends to then draw through that private sector interest. And definitely it's about working together. And I know that Clara spoke briefly about regulation. So the regulatory license is vital as well. So it's about, again, having policy on things like certification of hydrogen. So customers of Chile and Australia know what they're buying, so that we have the right safety approaches, so that the skills and training are in place. And these are things that we all have in common. These are foundational issues for the industry.
Yeah. Fantastic, Fiona, very insightful. Thank you very much for that. So we are going to very quickly move now to Darren. Thank you, Darren, for your fantastic presentation. Really interesting to see, and particularly to understand the role that ARENA is playing in this space. And based on that experience, what's your view on where renewable hydrogen is currently in Australia, and what is the commercialization pathway from here?
Thanks, Orlando. So I think that hydrogen in Australia today is sort of, ARENA is very central to that, as Fiona said. I mean, we've been able to support most of the hydrogen projects to date. I think the cutting edge project in Australia are those 7 that have been listed on one of my slides, and we hope to have at least 2 of those proceed to financial close by about mid next year. And that'll see us put in sort of 2 10 megawatt electrolyzers. My guess is going to be, you know, 50, 70, 80, $100 million of actual CapEx expend for each of them. they're the first ones we will have done. So it's important to get them actually built, understand what the technology is, get a cost baseline. And I think in terms of what I imagine we'll learn is really what it is what an electrolyzer costs, but very importantly, what's the cost of all the other associated CapEx. It's becoming increasingly clear that the actual electrolyzer stacks themselves might only be a minority of the upfront CapEx required. These are industrial scale plants. So when you run your numbers and calculate your H2 costs, it doesn't matter whether you spent that on pipes and storage tanks and compressors or whether you spent it on electrolyzer stacks. That cost goes into the equation for calculating your H2 costs. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing that we need, talking about the future, is we need to scale the industry, both in terms of getting the electrolyzer costs down on a per megawatt basis, or the balance of system costs as well down, but very importantly, the renewable energy costs. I mean, we think that solar and wind today in Australia is around $45 to $55 a megawatt hour. And while that is the cheapest form of new build generation, we really need to get that down into the low 20s to have a viable hydrogen industry. So we must not lose our attention on improvements and increased efficiencies in solar modules, in wind turbine blades, in ways of constructing those plants to achieve the massive cost reductions in the renewable energy resource that we require too.
Fantastic, Darren. Thank you very much. Very quickly now, we are going to move to Penelope. So Penelope, you there?
Yes, thank you, Orlando. Delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Look, I have two questions, and please, and we will try to keep you in 4 minutes if possible. So the first question is, what is the role of green ammonia in the world's energy decarbonization to help to keep global warming under 2 degrees? And the second is, how could Australia and Chile cooperate to compete as 2 major emerging global exporters of green ammonia?
Thank you so much. And I really want to thank all the speakers for a really high quality event. This has been very good. So a lot of people might not know, so I'll just quickly say, ammonia, as the minister pointed out, is NH3, 3 molecules of hydrogen, 1 molecule of nitrogen. And it's already a very large product which is traded internationally. What's exciting is that while it's been used for fertilizers and explosives in the past, there are new energy applications for ammonia. And one, it's emerging, as everyone has said, it's so important to get the costs down. One of the costs is, especially for exporters like Chile and Australia, how are we going to ship hydrogen to international markets economically? And ammonia is emerging as a key way to do that, because it's a lot cheaper and easier to put on a ship than shipping hydrogen as hydrogen, though there are companies exploring that as well and supply chain projects. So it's a great way of shipping ammonia to hydrogen to destination markets. And if people want to use the hydrogen in, say, Japan, they can what we call crack it back, crack ammonia back into hydrogen, say in Japan. But just as exciting for me is that ammonia is emerging as a new fuel, a new energy source. It can be used in gas turbines to generate electricity. It can be used to co-fire with coal to lower the emissions from coal plants, and Japan is quite advanced in not only demonstrating but taking that technology to scale. And perhaps the most exciting for me is, as the minister said, the shipping market. It's emerging as one of the front runner contenders as the zero emissions shipping fuel of the future, ammonia. And engines are being built now and tested in Europe that will run on heavy oil for as long as heavy oil is the economical one to use, but can also run on ammonia. So what needs to happen for this to the ammonia promise to be met? I think cooperation is very critical. And in terms of Chile and Australia, we are both members of some very important organisations to help to facilitate the transition, like the International Partnership for the Hydrogen Economy, Mission Innovation, where we, in IPHE, governments talk about things like certification. In Mission Innovation, we cooperate on technology, moving technology for hydrogen and ammonia forward, accelerating that. And in APEC, where Chile and Australia have a very deep cooperation on many different issues, there's the Energy Working Group, which is dealing with hydrogen and its derivatives like ammonia, and New Zealand, of course, is chairing next year. So it'll be interesting to see what they plan for hydrogen next year. But I think private sector collaboration is absolutely critical, and I'm also delighted to see the MOU between our two peak hydrogen bodies. But I think there's so much happening already. Many of the largest renewable energy developers are multinational companies. And in Australia, we have one very exciting project, 26 gigawatts. It will be the largest power plant in the world. It's been announced by CWP Renewables. They have projects in Latin America and Chile already as well. And they are planning to export green ammonia to the world out of the Pilbara from this huge plant. And it will also hopefully be used to decarbonise our mining industry in the Pilbara with the hydrogen and the renewable electricity that will come out. So the learnings from that project, and by the way, the developer is claiming that with a 26 gigawatt scale, they expect to come in under our stretch target of $2 per kilo for hydrogen. So it's the first time I've heard anyone say they can already beat that price, once they get to scale, I expect. But the learnings from that project, no doubt CWP will take those learnings to Latin American investments they have and investments in Chile. So I think it's very exciting, the prospects for cooperation, collaboration, and I'm just delighted to be here and working with Chile again on the energy transition. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Penelope. Really, really interesting to hear your comments and interesting points. So now it's the time for the audience Q&A questions. So I have 3 questions already, and one is for Minister Llobet, and the other one is for Darren, and the third one is an open question. So let's start with the minister. So the question says, when should Chile start making investments on developing equipment for the hydrogen economy, electrolyzers, cell fuels? And if you can, Minister, comment as well on the private sector portfolio of investments or initiatives that are being planned or carried out.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I'll start by the second part. We already have identified more than 20 pilot projects being developed in Chile for green hydrogen or its derivatives, right? So obviously the one that Clara summarized in Patagonia is one of the biggest ones, but there are many others, right? To produce ammonia in the north for explosives, for example, to generate, to use green hydrogen in buses or mining trucks. We have other for to use as fuel in forklifts in distribution centers for retail companies, and we have like more than 20 of those. But at what point will we be producing equipment ourselves? I'm not sure, to be honest with you, because I think we have a tradition of usually importing those equipments, using them here to produce different things. I really hope that this industry, given the potential we have, is an opportunity to develop capacities in Chile to produce the equipment, right, that we will require. But my guess is that at the beginning, at least of the development curve, we will be importing those equipments from abroad, and hopefully we can learn from that and start at some point producing them at home.
Fantastic, Minister. Thank you very much. Now a question for Darren. We've seen how active ARENA is in the funding space and how that connects with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation as well. The question is about how these two organizations, or in the Australian ecosystem more broadly, there is any role given to the venture capital industry, and so what tips or learnings you can share with us?
So, yeah, the venture capital industry, especially in terms of clean tech, has been mainly supported by government in Australia. So the Clean Energy Finance Corporation runs a $200 million fund focused on clean tech innovation, and ARENA has provided funding along with a Chinese investor in our own venture capital fund. But there hasn't been much more that I'm aware of that's dedicated to clean tech that's done purely by the private sector. So it is a space with long lead times and lots of technology risk, particularly around not only the innovation side, but also hardware side. And when you get into hardware, you've got a much more challenge around the venture capital return profiles. I think increasingly globally, those funds have been more successful recently, and I'd hope that more venture capital money does come into the Australian market, and ARENA might play a role there in the future. But particularly if we turn our attention to hydrogen, I think it's unlike the sort of customer-centric side, the electricity side, where there's a lot of startups operating to innovate around the customer home, demand management, smart meters, data, and the like. Hydrogen's quite different in that it's research coming out of universities that leads its way through to industry. So it's much more about how do we connect innovation out of universities to industrial players who will actually take that up at scale. Probably less of a role for traditional venture capital in making that happen. But certainly, generally in energy transition, there's a big role for startups and for increased flow of funds for those companies.
Fantastic, Darren. Thank you. So I have some other questions. So this one is an open question. So happy for my colleagues from the panel to take it. Maybe we have the possibility for two of them if they are interested in commenting. But it's about technology transfer. And the question is, what role do you see on technology transfer as a mechanism to build capacities and understanding of how this works? Anyone interested in making comments on this?
I'm happy to make a quick comment, Orlando, but I would like to invite you to make a comment in a way as the science agency. And obviously, I think Chile and Australia are in a special position that CSIRO is in Chile and is one of our leading research organizations when it comes to hydrogen research and hydrogen derivatives as well. So I think there is a technology-related collaboration and cooperation very ambitiously led in the Mission Innovation Forum. So that's one multilateral forum that's very relevant for technology development and transfer. But also there will be universities level, a very deep R&D underway in Australia when it comes to green steel and other and the hydrogen and derivatives space. So I think our universities can collaborate. CSIRO is almost a convener of that process sometimes as well here in Australia. And we have actually, CSIRO has just hosted the one-stop shop for hydrogen policies and projects in Australia. So I'm sure that link can be shared with colleagues in Chile as well to get more visibility of what's going on, especially in the R&D space. But as I said, the technology transfer will also happen simply by companies that are selling electrolyzers discovering and taking those electrolyzer technologies to scale in various countries as the scale is developed. And then that technology will be built into the latest model of electrolyzers that they put on the market over time. So I think the private sector is critical for technology transfer as well.
Yeah, I agree. If I may make comment on this one, I think it's obviously a very critical point. My perspective is that Australia and Chile could essentially use their, let's say, fantastic relationships that they have with Asia and Europe to work together on this. And some of the technologies that are out there obviously are not being developed in our countries. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel, in my opinion, and obviously working on investment frameworks that give certainty to investors, but also providing funding that may be leveraged between Chile and Australia is a way to go. So the Chilean government has already funding mechanisms in place similar to the ARENA ones, and the question becomes why not to connect the dots and see what can benefit, let's say, work on a cross-pollination scenario in which the countries, given precisely the endowments that we have, which are very similar, so mining industry, large deserts, so there will be obviously cross links and lessons learned across the board that needs to be embedded. And therefore, I think the key question is about how you integrate the ecosystems on different levels. And it's about critical mass, really. There's no one single element they need to do, but probably a combination of elements in which government, research organization, and industry collaborate. And this obviously is a global game. So cooperation is at the very core of a successful strategy, because it's not really about Australia or Chile. It's about how Australia and Chile can join efforts to really have a global impact. And technology transfer is obviously one of the key elements on that space in particular. So I'm getting, so there is one minute or so for a few other questions I have. So let me have a look. Now, this already has been addressed. No, I think we are good with these questions. And before we move to the next section of the panel, I've been asked to do a bit of a wrap up on the key points that the different colleagues from the panel have made. Let me go through my notes. Obviously, first, looking at Minister Jovet's presentation, the similarities, challenges that Australia, Chile face are enormous. The potential is there. I think the like-minded approach and the similarities I think provides the conditions to integrate efforts across the countries, and diplomacy together with cooperation is the way to go. And one point that the minister made, I think makes a lot of sense, which is in order to be successful, we need a consistency across governments. It's not really about one government changing everything what the previous one did. It's about how we're able to sustain policies over time. When we look at Clara, I think Clara mentioned three fundamental elements. So high quality renewable energy is the basics, obviously, and it's all about cost competitiveness when it comes to the success of private investment on this. Secondly, it's about scale, and then technology for that, and the possibility of running pilot projects is fundamental to that strategy. And finally, is finance efficiency, and I think what Amy has done by securing the demand on particular, I think clears the way to really have the possibility to go to the next level. When it comes to Fiona, I think Fiona pointed out at collaboration at the key point in which policy is fundamental, and policy is about reaching, let's say, the regulatory license, economic license, and social license, and the economic license in particular, the role that ARENA and the federal and the regional governments in Australia have played is a key element, and I think we're starting to see that happening more often in Chile. So if the technology is not ready yet, we will need to have some sort of public support that then engage into larger scale investment from the private sector. So collaboration on a private-public approach is clearly the way to go. And a second element is about the standards and having clear targets. And it's about creating the condition for market pool developments rather than technology push, right? And behind all of that, because we need funding, because we need regulations and initiatives, it's all about leadership from the government. And I think if one can conclude on Fiona's comment, in my opinion, it's about that, how the government can help others to do what they know how to do it. Darren gave us a very thorough presentation on funding mechanisms. And I think the ability to develop electrolyzers, scale investment are fundamental elements for this strategy. And obviously that comes with cost reduction. And finally, Penelope gave a really good example on the ammonia as a vehicle to overcome some issues with the hydrogen exportation in particular, which touches base with what Minister Jovet said as well about transport and logistics issues. And finally, on Penelope's presentation, she clearly pointed out at cooperation as something very critical. And she mentioned a number of initiatives. And I think given particularly the importance of the Asian market for green hydrogen, I think APEC, it's a unique platform, a unique forum for Chile and Australia to actively work on this space. And probably that will be the concluding remark of my wrap up. And I think my role as a moderator has come to an end. So thank you everybody for taking part. And now I'm going to hand over to Fiona because she will talk about something really exciting to happen. Thank you, everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Orlando. So certainly, as we've heard today, we are at a defining point in history. As the world moves to decarbonise, we have the chance to boost our country's capabilities and resilience to economic shock through using clean and green hydrogen in the energy mix. So the Australian Hydrogen Council, or AHC, is the peak body for the emerging hydrogen industry in Australia. Our objective is to accelerate the commercialisation of new hydrogen and fuel cell technologies for transportation, export, storage and stationary applications in Australia. So we connect the industry participants with one another and with our stakeholders so we can create a vibrant and sustainable hydrogen industry. So we have 55 members at the moment, they're businesses. And I'm pleased to say we're still growing quickly. We've just had another 7 apply in this last month. So similar to the Australian Hydrogen Council, H2 Chile has an objective to accelerate the energy transition by promoting the development of hydrogen technologies and their use as an energy vector in a range of potential applications. H2 Chile is a collaborative space between public, private and academic entities that are interested in the use of hydrogen as an energy vector, and in particular to position Chile as a leader in the production and use of green hydrogen. So the Australian Hydrogen Council and H2 Chile began discussions several months ago to share views and to collaborate on the use of hydrogen in the mining industry. But together we realised that the challenges in our 2 countries for establishing the hydrogen industry are actually very similar, and this led us to expand our areas of collaboration, which we are happy to say are now formalised with the signing of this Memorandum of Understanding. So AHC, and well, I am very pleased to announce this agreement. The versatility, as I mentioned before, of potential hydrogen use across sectors, combined with its pre-commercial industry status, means that the opportunities are vast, but they require leadership and planning. They require coordination and collaboration. So we must work together both domestically and internationally. So AHC definitely looks forward to a great relationship with H2 Chile. So now I'd like to introduce Hans Kuhlenkampf to say a few words. Hans is the chairman of H2 Chile and he has the MOU in his hands. So over to you, Hans.
Thank you a lot, Fiona, and thanks everybody who organized this very detailed, technically advanced webinar. I'm pretty excited to announce that we have been working actually with Fiona and all these teams from a couple of months already, discussing many of the things that we have been discussing right now. We have mentioned many times right now cooperation. Cooperation is very much needed. I want to remember everybody here that we have indeed a very important challenge, which is called climate change. And there's going to be only losers or winners. Either we all as humanity win this race, or either we all lose it. And Chile as the hidden champion, Australia as the giant, we are now starting this cooperation to accelerate the uptake of hydrogen. Let's use the wind and the solar of the southern hemisphere to power the northern hemisphere. That's where we are all. We have also something in common. We share the same colors in our flags. Let's share the same color of hydrogen to power and transition in this energy. So with that being said, I have the MOU here. I'm going to formally sign it in front of the camera. So it's extremely happy to say that we are going to start this collaboration. And just if you're wondering, I'm going to read just the main points. We said we're going to share and participate in committees, working groups and industry events to share information. We're going to exchange information, policy and regulation of each government. We're going to share lessons. We're going to share mistakes. Well, this is important. We're going to share mistakes on how to promote hydrogen offtake in the mining industry, in the ports and maritime industry, in the chemical industry. We're going to try to share how can we scale up the electrolyzer manufacturing plants. How can we scale up, not in 1 megawatt, 10 megawatts, how can we scale up to hundreds of megawatts of electrolyzer? We're going to speak about certifies of quantities of origin. How can we certify green hydrogen if we are both exporting? And we're going to try to see how can we support each other in finding innovative financial mechanisms. This is all about this our MOU. H2 Chile is currently a group of 45 individual members. 15 companies join us from the beginning of the year. We expect to be probably between 20 and 25. This is only 2020. We are growing incredibly fast. This is also a very interesting message to the private sector. We're working, and hopefully we are going to now collaborate more with Australia. So this is the formal MOU for the picture. Let me see if you can see the signatures there for the formal picture. So if the organization can please take a picture of, give me a second, just like that. Perfect. I hope that Fiona is also in the screen, just to put it on the media, and I give the channel and the voice to the organizers.
Congratulations, guys. I think the organizers are somewhere, but I just want to congratulate you both for this effort. I think it's very important that the cooperation is not only, as I said at the beginning, between governments, but also you guys got a lot of work to do, and also companies. So this is great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Keep up.
Thank you, Minister.
Good job.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Suddenly, we are arrived the end of the webinar. We are very proud to present of the MOU signature between Australia Hydrogen Council and H2 Chile, as well as to be part of this event and listen to the shared strategy between both countries. We would like to thank the initiative from the Chilean Energy Ministry and the Australian Embassy. Finally, thank you, Orlando, and everybody who joined the conversation in this very interesting. Now, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Todd Mercer, Ambassador of Australia in Chile. To all the guests, thank you for your attendance, and we hope to meet you soon in the new webinar. Mr. Ambassador, The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christian, and I'll keep it brief because I know there's been a lot of information conveyed tonight, and it's been fascinating. I'd like to join the Minister in congratulating the Australian Hydrogen Council and H2 Chile on the signing of the MOU. It's a really significant step, and it's, I think, as Penelope said, it's a reflection of the recognition on the part of industry of the value of our two countries collaborating on hydrogen. Thank you, Minister Jobert, for your participation tonight, and to your amazing team at the Ministry of Energy. It was your suggestion, your initiative, and thank you very much for approaching us. I think, just looking at the number of people that are participating in the event this evening or in the morning in Australia, I mean, that says, volumes, speaks volumes about, just how important this discussion is. And I think the quality of the conversation was excellent. And a big thank you to all of the panelists, because really it's the substance and your contributions have made a huge difference. A few thank yous. Thank you, Ambassador Powell. Good to see you again there in Canberra. Thanks for joining us. To Christian and Orlando, who both did a great job in emceeing and moderating and keeping the conversation moving along nicely. Thank you again to Auscham for providing the platform, and Christian to help us get through this. A big thank you to Gab and Sophia from Austrade here in Santiago, and helping pull all of this together. Just a few words on hydrogen. I mean, it's actually hydrogen, and green hydrogen in particular, has been a theme that has come up in many of my meetings in the 9 months I've been here in Chile, that I've been back here in Chile. And I think the title of the event today sort of, sums up the central theme of many of those discussions, and the title being Australia and Chile, our green hydrogen future. So I think we can see from all of the panelists today that there is a bright and exciting future ahead of us. So today is an important step. It was an important discussion, but it's part of a conversation which is well underway. As the minister mentioned, Chile is hosting an online green hydrogen summit next week, and we're very much looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to hearing our Australian speaker, the Ambassador for the Environment, Jamie Isbister. He leads Australia's involvement in international environment issues, and he'll be speaking on behalf of the Australian government. And as part of that summit, I also wanted to mention there'll be a virtual Australian pavilion. So I'd invite all of you to visit. That's a pavilion that's been set up and organised by Austrade with the support of ARENA, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and also will feature CSIRO, as you heard, that Orlando leads here in Chile. And our pavilion will showcase Australia's policies, initiatives that we're taking, the key players, and our research and development capabilities in the hydrogen space. So really do come along and see all of that. So I think it's up to me to wrap it up. And again, thank you to everybody. Thank you in particular to all of those people who dedicated the time this evening or this morning to participate. And I look forward to speaking with all of you again in the near future. Thanks very much.